Well, I'm calling this more than monarchs. Not that monarchs aren't important, we know that they are. And monarchs have served as wonderful models. They've served as a wonderful model for how well conservation can work when the public is motivated. But they're also the poster child for biodiversity declines in general. As monarchs go so many other things. And that's why we're seeing very scary headlines that illustrate that, such as North America has lost 3 billion birds in the last 50 years. That's a third of the North American bird population gone. The UN says, well, gee, we're going to lose 1 million species to extinction, maybe in the next 20 years. And I love the way they say that, as if it's just one more headline. They might as well say we're going to lose oxygen in the next 20 years and then go on to the next headline. It's not an option, folks. It's not an option to lose species like this. Then we have the insect apocalypse, global insect decline. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Well, fortunately, Ed Wilson, E.O. Wilson, Harvard emeritus at this point, certainly the most famous entomologist of all time, certainly today, he told us what it would mean if we were to lose insects on planet Earth. And he did it way back in 1987 with this paper, The Little Things That Run the World. His message was very clear. Life as we know it depends on insects. And if they were to disappear, so would most of our flowering plants. And if most of our flowering plants disappeared, that would so radically change energy flow through our terrestrial habitats that the food webs that support the food webs that support our animals, the amphibians, the reptiles, the bird, and the mammals, even many of our freshwater fish, those food webs would collapse and they would all disappear. The biosphere, the living portion of the Earth, would rot because we would have lost insect decomposers that rapidly turn over nutrients right now, and all we would have is bacteria and fungi. And of course, humans wouldn't survive any of those drastic changes. The good news is that doesn't have to happen. We can save our insects, monarchs, and all the rest. We can save our birds, we can save nature itself, but we're going to have to change the way we landscape to do it. What we're talking about here is rebuilding nature where we have dismantled it, and that's a lot of places. But all species don't contribute to nature, to ecosystem function equally. So we have to start with the building blocks. We can add other species later. There are two building blocks that we cannot do without. And those flowering plants are one of them. Plants, of course, are capturing the energy from the sun, turning it into food, which is then stored in their leaves. We're not going to have the flowering plants unless we have the pollinators that allow those plants to reproduce. So that's one group that is non-negotiable, has to be there. Now the energy from the sun is locked up in the leaves of plants. Most vertebrates don't eat plants directly. They eat something that ate plants. That something typically is insects. And it turns out that caterpillars are transferring more energy from plants to other animals than any other type of plant eater. So if we're going to rebuild nature, if we're going to have viable food webs, we have to have lots of caterpillars in our landscapes. That, by the way, is a new goal for landscaping. In the past, we've landscaped strictly for aesthetics, and any insect that was around got sprayed or killed rapidly. We're not going to do that anymore. Let me give you an example of how important caterpillars are for birds. I had a recent graduate student, Ashley Kennedy, who did a citizen science project. She put out a call to bird photographers to take pictures of birds nationwide during the breeding season when they were carrying food to the nest. And they were going to send those pictures to Ashley. She was then going to identify the prey items in the beaks of the birds. And that's what you're looking at here. Then she was going to reconstruct the nestling diet of as many birds as she can. And that is what you're looking at here. The nestling diet of 20 of the common bird families in North America. The green bars are the percentage of caterpillars that are in those nestling diets. And in 16 out of the 20 common bird families, caterpillars dominate the diet. So again, imagine what would happen if we develop landscapes that don't have enough caterpillars. Most of our terrestrial birds would not be able to reproduce. So that and lots of other evidence is suggesting the caterpillars are not optional parts of bird diets. It's really looking like they are essential parts of bird diets. So let's just say birds need caterpillars. All right, how are we going to provide those caterpillars? How do we landscape for caterpillars? Again, a very new goal in terms of landscaping. But we add caterpillars to landscapes by adding the plants that make them. That seems simple enough, but there is a catch, and that is most plants don't support a lot of caterpillars. So we have to add the ones that do. And they don't support a lot of caterpillars because most caterpillars are very fussy about what they eat. That means we have to be fussy about which plants we put in our landscapes. And some of the plants, well, plants that are going to have to be in every landscape, not all the plants, but some of them will have to be what I'm calling keystone plants. They are essential in terms of supporting caterpillars. Now remember what a keystone is. This is the Roman arch. The keystone is the stone in the middle of that arch. And if you take that stone out, the arch collapses. Well, if you take keystone plants out of a food web, it collapses. We found out that just 5% of our native plants are making 75% of that caterpillar food that's driving the food webs. 14% of our native plants are making 90% of the caterpillar food that drives those food webs. So think of let's say your goal is to build an ecological house in your yard. The keystone plants are the 2x4s of that house. They're essential. The house is not going to stand up without them. You can't build a house out of wallpaper. Now, they're not the only thing that goes into that house, but they're essential. So we certainly have to think about adding keystone plants to our landscapes. What is the most powerful keystone plant in 84% of the counties of North America? It's one of the oaks. In the mid-Atlantic states, oaks support 557 species of caterpillars, which you could say 557 species of bird food. Over 950 species of caterpillars nationwide. There is no other plant genus that comes close to that. So I want to give you just one example from my own house of how well restoring keystone plants works. This is our house, what it looked like when we moved in Southeast Pennsylvania. It was a farm that was had been farmed for a very long time, about 300 years. So it was totally exhausted. The last thing they did was to mow it for hay. So there was very, very few plants on that property. But we have put the plants back. First, we had to get rid of the invasive plants that don't support a lot of caterpillars, put in the native plants that do. And when we started this process, I didn't know anything about keystone plants, but fortunately I did include an awful lot of those oaks. And I made it a goal 4 years ago to start taking pictures of every species of moth that I could find on our property as adults. So of course, moths come from caterpillars. Now I haven't gotten to the butterflies yet. We do have monarchs and I will count them one of these days, but I'm up to 1,042 species of moths on our property. And we have 10 acres in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is 2.4 million acres. So on 1/240,000th of the land mass, we have 40% of all the moths in the entire state. And because most of these species are bird food, we have recorded 59 species of birds that have bred on our 10 acres. Not flew by, but bred, which is 38% of all the terrestrial birds that breed in Pennsylvania. This is another scary headline that we saw last fall. The World Wildlife Fund says that we have lost 2/3 of our wildlife since 1970. But I'm thinking, not at our house. I am sure we have put back more than 2/3 of the biodiversity that was here at one point, probably more than that. And it didn't take that long, and we did it simply by putting the plants back. So just as we restore monarch populations by putting milkweeds back, that is true for all of the host plant specialists in the insect world, and that's about 90% of them. Point is, plant choice matters, and plant choice will make the difference. It's making the difference for the monarchs. It's going to make the difference for the rest of the biodiversity that is out there. Thanks very much.